Activism with the Head and Heart. The evening will offer an opportunity to understand how mindfulness and other meditations might support the capacity to remain centered amongst difficult emotions, while also remaining kindly connected to the world, fostering understanding, and building the capacity for joy. Just before I turn it over to Dr. Yin, I've got a couple of announcements from the Buddhist Society. The first one is for our annual general meeting. It is going to be held this upcoming Saturday, the 26th of September, beginning at 4:30 p.m. And if you're interested in attending, please make sure to arrive at 4 p.m. for registration. Tomorrow we have our Q&A sessions for new Buddhists, as well as our Introduction to Meditation courses. The Q&A will be starting at 2 p.m., and Intro to Meditation is at 3 here at the Dhamma Hall as well. And next, we also need some volunteers. The Stalker Road Monastery is in particular need of plumbing and gas volunteers, if anyone is willing to volunteer their services, as well as just general labor in helping them build their monastery. The AV team here is actually needing a AV coordinator, so if you're interested in putting your name forward, please just email Amanda at admin@bswa.org, or just feel free to look at our website as well. And lastly, the monks will actually need volunteers for their End of Rains, or Katina, at Jhana Grove, which is going to be held at 4th October, just coming up here in a couple weeks. So that's it. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Yin. Thank you.
That might be on. Yeah? Yeah, that's on. That one's on. But I don't know, is that on now? Yeah. That's loud enough now. We finally got there, I think. Yep. So I'm just going to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which are on, the Wajak Noongar people, and pay my respects to the custodians. They're elders, both past and present, and those emerging. This is a slightly odd topic in a slightly odd space, but it's an interesting experiment trying to bring together, hopefully, some activists in the room, together people that are non-activist, and maybe introduce you to some of the difficulties if you're not an activist, or what it means to be an activist working in the context, particularly of climate change. So you get to understand the work that some of these people do. And it follows some early talks that I've already given on climate change, and the presumption is that most people understand the enormity of the problem actually is, and the threat that it actually poses to the world. So I want to, wow, there's a bit of echo. I also wanted to speak openly. Am I on or not on now? Still on. I really also wanted to speak openly and address the issue about the emotional difficulty about talking to this topic. It's not something that people like to talk about because it's really uncomfortable, talking about something that's an existential threat. But I think if we don't talk about it, it doesn't mean the problem goes away. So the problem is still there, and I think part of the reason we don't talk about it is because it's difficult. So there needs to be some way that we can contain or know how to hold that difficulty within us and find some way of accepting that difficult emotion. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to move ahead if we just constantly avoid an issue. Finally, in particular, I do want to talk about burnout. I want to try to keep this pragmatic. There's a few people in this room. I'll just better check. How many people in the room identify as being advocates or activists? Okay. So there are a few people in this room. So I want to talk about the issue about burnout, particularly in the context of climate change. Touch upon the notion of something called moral injury, and try to give some pragmatic solutions, not solutions, but maybe a pragmatic approach and a way of thinking about approaching this sort of work that's incredibly challenging. So there's a chunk here that's at least Buddhist influenced in what I say and the presentation, but it should be that it can be easily adapted for anyone that's not a Buddhist. So while the structure has elements of Buddhism, it certainly is not a Buddhist presentation here. And I think it's interesting to have the discourse here. If there's one thing that Buddhism is good about, it's quite open about talking about difficulties. It's quite good about talking about issues around impermanence, about death, about uncertainty. And so what better place than within this setting where those are issues that are within the discourse of Buddhism. And I suppose my last little reflection on why I'm giving this talk here. Personally, I reflect a lot on how, as a Buddhist, one should respond to climate change. Especially as someone living in Australia, and especially in the light of a federal government that has done very little to respond to this threat, and really has continued to undermine actions both locally and internationally. So harm is being done, and the underpinnings of the natural world are unravelling, and species are becoming extinct rapidly. And if, as Buddhists, we take precepts, including that which includes not killing, the question for me is how should we respond? And I don't mean to offer an easy answer. So while also the focus is a lot on burnout, there are other mental health issues, and I think we should acknowledge some of those. So here's some little definitions. Here's a definition on activism, and the main focus of the word that I want to focus on is this change. So activists do things to change society for a perceived greater good. Now, as a change agent, the problem with being a change agent is that you have to push against the status quo, right? So there's an immediate confrontation with the norm, and you're working against the status quo. The status quo is also the thing that has the most power. So here you are, usually as a small group or individual, trying to push an agenda that is not the norm. Now, so that includes being a feminist within maybe a patriarchal society. That includes being a climate change activist against what is a fossil fuel dependent society where there's a lot of money and vested interest and power. So you're faced with working in a situation where you are invariably the underdog and invariably up against a degree of conflict in challenging a point of view. So it's not an easy job. So day in and day out, your job is to step out there, try to push for change against people and powers that are bigger and stronger than you. And by nature, it causes difficult emotions to rise. It causes conflict in some way. And how you handle the conflict is an important thing. So here's the other definition, and the definition is one of burnout. The definition of burnout usually speaks to chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed and usually working within difficult emotional conditions. That's the traditional definition of burnout. And I want to point to three aspects around it that should just be noted. One is the physical domain, and you don't have to be an activist to experience this. There's probably a chunk of people here that know a little bit of what this experience is like. The feeling of being exhausted, of being depleted in energy. Then there's a mental effect where you start getting a little bit cynical, a little bit removed from your job, a little feeling of negativism around your work, and finally something around productivity that in some ways affects the efficacy of what you're doing. So that is a traditional definition. Some people want to extend the idea it's not a state, but actually a process. And I want to highlight this as an idea because if it's a process, then you could observe it happening to you. And if you can observe it happening to you, there's a chance that you might be able to do something about it if you recognise that it's happening. So it's a gradual exposure to job strain, the erosion of idealism, a sense of a void of achievement, and then here are a list of the symptoms. Again, the fatigue, some of the emotional aspects and irritability, maybe a sense of helplessness, something around pessimism or callousness, work-related symptoms. You know, you might be needing time off for work, feeling like you're not particularly productive. Difficulty with interpersonal communications where you start distancing from people around you. So,
hello and welcome
to notice what's
to
going on,
this meditation session.
you need a level of self-awareness.
As usual, I have to make the announcement that we're starting
the
series of 4 introductory classes are held in the room to my right. If you go to the reception area, it's a room you pass just on this side of the hall. So those who haven't meditated before, if you could please make your way to the room to my right over there, where the introductory course
is the training of your work. So if you understand that what your job entails is difficulty, it's a difficult job to do, then shouldn't part of the job that you undertake as someone in that space be to start cultivating that capacity for self-awareness? Right? If you went to a dangerous job or in a war situation and you weren't doing those sorts of mental preparations, it would be remiss. But at the same time, as an activist, you're daily stepping into what are difficult situations emotionally. Shouldn't that be part of the training? That you think about how you're going to look after yourself. And it relates to a concept of thinking around burnout that was more applied to people within a war setting, the veteran setting. And the thinking was that these people weren't burning out in a traditional sort of way, they're burning out in a slightly different sort of way. And they were burning out because they were going to be what's happening to you day in and day out. And in particular with climate change, there's some big issues. It's hard. It's a big, complex problem. It's overwhelming. It's urgent. Often you're carrying the burden of knowledge that society as a whole is unable or willing to face. So you're trying to deal with a situation that most people don't want to deal with or can't deal with. And you're having to prolonged attention on disturbing or negative information, future projections about what's going to happen, and that constantly triggers you in some way. So there are just some thoughts. More around that is just that, as I said, you're working with resistance. They're powerful agents against change. It's hard to make progress. Wins are few and far between, and often it's a small group that's really under-resourced that's doing this type. Anyone that's experiencing a degree of stress that might be susceptible can easily be triggered into more clinical conditions such as depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress. And so even though the trigger event might be something that relates to burnout, it's important to try to make some distinction about what's going on, and if you're not coping, it's important that you actually see a health professional. So I just want to make sure that the little thing that might be focused around climate change or the thing that you're engaged in gets be seen also in a bigger light, that it might actually be triggering other things that are going on. So I'm now going to list some steps and then go on to maybe discuss some pragmatic ways going forward and introduce some mindfulness and meditation practices. But I just want to lay out the idea about what we're trying to do. So one, as I said, is you have to acknowledge that the work is difficult and that you need to take care of yourself. You have to be realistic about what it is you can or can't do and not underestimate the impact to your health. I don't, as someone that spends a lot of time doing this work, I do not for once think I can't burn out. Having been there before, when I was much younger, I do not want to go back there again. So I don't mean I never come close or approximate it, but I promise you, I never want to go back there again, because I think it took me about a year or 2 years to actually return back to the workplace following that experience. And as I said, even having had the experience and knowing what it's about, I still never doubt that I can go back to that place again if I don't care for myself. So you should know something about the symptoms. You should be checking in on those symptoms, right, as to whether you are experiencing or moving down that line. And as I said, seek help, reach out to friends, and it's really important to build supportive networks around you. A few little ideas. So for those of you that are working in this circle, the structure to your work is really important. If you have a really good structure about how you operate, how you advocate, and the work gets shared around, right, and you have tactics and you have strategy, then it's much less likely that you're burning out, all right? Some of you will understand these terms: circles of commitment, alliance building, sort of like critical pathways, where you think through what you're trying to do, and it's a staged process, and you try to achieve wins that are manageable. All those things really help, rather than feeling like you're throwing yourself against an enormous enemy and like throwing little pebbles at something that's ginormous. So if you can build a way of a campaign that's built on a series of steps, and you understand how you're going to succeed, and you just move through those steps, about spending time in nature. I really can't emphasise it because it's been repeatedly shown now that spending time in nature is good for mental health. So spend time in nature, it does something to you without you needing to do anything. It tops you up. It's one of the things that genuinely can top you up. Start feeding you in some sort of way. Right. Now, here's the nitty-gritty of some of the work. People generally engage in activism because something deeply, they care for something, and in that caring they see something hurt or injured or destroyed in some sort of way, and that makes them angry. It can't possibly be you live your life angry. It can't possibly be your activism is founded on anger. It will kill you. Right? As an emotion, it's really destructive. You have to go beyond anger. Now, having worked in some of the activist circles, anger is, get someone angry and you get them doing something. But do it year in and year out, or week in, week out, or month in, month out. It will kill you. You cannot, in the longer term, function on reactivity, anger, and fear. The thing is, you care for something. You should be thinking about that. Caring can go a long way. Caring for yourself, caring for others. So, social media. If you're an advocate, there's a chunk of us that spend time on social media because that's where you get the news from and what's actually going on. It triggers a whole heap of reactivity. Just mind the dose, right? Each and every time you see some of those images, it triggers anger or it triggers fear. And each and every time your body and your mind go through a certain reaction. You can't be spending so much time that you're constantly being triggered. You have to build a practice that supports your mental health. Right? It can't be just left to chance. So you have to build structures in some sort of way that actually support your mental health. And there need to be some values embedded in there. I would include, to my mind, things like mindfulness, that you can be more self-aware. Things like kindness and caring, and things that energize you. I'm going to just stop for a little while now. Does anyone have any comments or questions? I don't want to talk to myself. Can someone please? Yes. Yeah. Oh, wait.
I'm interested to hear more about the building process. You've talked a few times about building different things that are going to be helpful in the long term.
Yeah.
Are we going into that more?
We are. Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? Yeah, everyone's about right with that, what I've presented so far in terms of understanding, right? You understand how, if you are in an active circle, that anger is the predominant emotion that actually drives everything. So we need to have some other structures in place. There was a question back there?
Yes, because I am one question, because I am very sad all the time. I am very person, very angry and fear.
Say that again. Sorry.
I am very angry and fear because I am explosion immediately, but the meditation is helping me.
Yes.
Because about for the PTSD, what does it mean PTSD? Because
Yeah, that's post-traumatic stress disorder. They're people that have had traumatic situations and they sort of relive them. So we're going to talk about maybe some mindfulness practices that you can contain the reactivity and get less caught up in that anger.
Yes, yeah? Please, because I am very explosion very quick.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Was there another question somewhere? Yes. Yeah. Hi.
I'm kind of interested in what we can do as Buddhists to think about the moral injury of denial. Yeah. Because it seems to me there's two causes for denial.
Yes.
And the other one is cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Yeah. So, in that process of cognitive dissonance,
Yes.
people experience suffering because they're using challenge.
Yeah.
And what they do is they fall back.
Yeah.
They double down.
Yeah.
They fall back and
Yeah.
become more rigid.
Yeah.
So, if we could express compassion around their suffering, maybe we can get them to shift.
I would completely agree. So there's this funny thing of needing to challenge, to meet with that, but not be angry and be open to who and what they are, right? And the trouble usually is at that point of time, there's this conflict and both sides, each side takes a point of view and everyone gets a little bit angry and feels threatened, and then you get this conflict arising. So the beauty about some of the practices that lie within Buddhism is that it creates structures where you might be able to hold some of that reactivity, contain some of that reactivity, train to stay kind and open to a situation, right, that you can engage within what are difficult settings and situations, right? But that needs training. That needs a lot of training, and it needs it particularly when you're walking into situations that are where emotions run very high, right? So this is partly the discourse that I'm interested in. How do we do that, and what does Buddhism have to offer? And I think it has a lot to offer, as long as it's prepared to meet with the difficulty, meet with differences, be prepared to engage, right, on this topic, knowing it's going to create emotions and, strong emotions, but understanding that there are some skills that can be trained and learned, embedded within Buddhism, that can support that encounter. Because the idea of staying away doesn't help anyone. So there's this weird way where we've got to create dialogue, and the dialogue might not be easy, but if we can stay open, if we can stay trying to understand, if we can stay compassionate, then there's much more chance that we can come to know each other and understand each other's point of view. Because right now, there's a lot going on in the world where tensions are running very, very high. Whether that's to do with the rising concerns around social injustice, racial injustice, injustices on a whole number of fronts, where there's aspects of politics that are playing to causing conflict, almost using conflict as a political tool, where cultural differences amongst countries are being played out, and there's again that tension that's going on more between countries. There's a lot that's going on, and what it's going to take are people that can stay sane, that can stay centered, that can stay kind and trying to understand without stepping back necessarily, being clear about how to be responsive rather than reactive. A lot, I think, Buddhism offers a lot in that regard, but it requires, I think, us to step out a little bit rather than just be on our couch or on our mat. In my mind, it requires a little more than being on our mat. Yep.
Richard, the Buddha was telling us that there are 3 poisons.
Yes.
The first one is The Buddha was telling us that there are 3 poisons.
Yes.
First one is greed.
Yes.
Second is hatred.
Yes.
Or anger. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Third one is delusion. Okay.
Yes.
So this hatred, anger, it says when you release this negative energy, our body absorbs the poison, and we become sick. I don't know, maybe you can...
Say that one more time.
So, when we release, say for example, hatred or anger, okay, so the body absorbs this poison, and if it's too much, we become sick.
Yeah.
I don't... Is there any relation?
I don't know about that. I think it's... I certainly think sometimes in the process of... what would the okay word be within a Buddhist context? Let me try and frame this. Certainly for the Tibetans, they say within the process of, inverted commas, purification, sometimes there are bodily illnesses. bodily experiences that are unpleasant or sicknesses that arise, and that's not such a bad thing. But either way, irrespective of that way of thinking, we should still just be focused on what it is, what's compassionate action, what is it that we need to do, how is it we need to engage in the world in this caring and understanding sort of way, being present to what's arising. Yeah. Are there any other comments or questions before we might start something? No. I'm really... Just see what I got here. One, yeah.
Well, it's just a question about the time spent in nature. How much time do we have to spend in nature for it to be beneficial, or is that different person to person?
I think it was 20 minutes, I think. I can't remember how many times a week now. Anyone remember? It's around 2 or 3 times a week, around 20 minutes.
Yeah, and is that, like, I've got an 11-month-old daughter, and my way of thinking, I want to get out of the city and expose her to more nature and a lot less iPads and technology and stuff like that. Yeah. Is that beneficial right from birth, right through to...
I don't know the data on that, but I'd be really surprised if it wasn't.
Yeah, okay.
I'd be really surprised if that didn't stand a child in good stead in some sort of way.
20 minutes a few times a week is...
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be like out in the
middle
of nowhere. That could be a park.
Even in a park.
Okay, cool.
It carries some benefit like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. This probably shows my age. I don't know whether anyone knows where that's from, the song. No. You have to be an Elvis Costello fan from 1976 or something, I think. Sorry. So I really think that these aren't bad. I'll just jump through. I don't mind peace. I think peace is a nice thing. And I don't mind love, and I don't mind understanding. I think we should be trying to cultivate them, okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about peace, all right? I'm not Ajahn Brahm, nor am I Dalai Lama, right? And stepping out into this space, I don't think I'm going to do this really mellow, chilled, smiling in my engagement with a difficult situation. But I believe that I can train the capacity to contain some of my reactivity, not buy into it, try to stay somewhat present and grounded, try to be a little bit distant, and work at least at not feeding my reactivity in some sort of way and giving it a bit of space. That would be a really good start, right? And if it should happen that you have a measure of calm and joy, all good and well, but let's not go for gold in our training. We're just going to get some basics happening and make sure we embed that as an idea. Don't buy into the reactivity. Create some space. See whether you can hold and contain it without losing it, like wanting to deck someone or hurt someone. Just try to hold the whole thing would be a good start. Trying to foster kindness and caring during practice would also be a good thing. And finally, trying to stay somewhat clear and curious and interested in what's arising would also be useful. And I'll throw the last one in, joy, and I'll bracket that by way of just thinking that that just might be something that arises and can be fostered rather than trained. So we're going to do practice now. So we're going to do a meditation, and this is how I frame meditation. I frame meditation as a practice. I don't frame it as a state. The Tibetans use the word that's something like familiarization. So they're not talking about any state that you arrive at, they're talking about a training and getting used to something. Right? So we're going to train. You can't fail in training. Everyone has to make mistakes in training, so you can't fail in this particular exercise. But you've got to be clear what you're training. That's the only thing. You've got to be clear what you're training. So we're training to try to stay somewhat centered, somewhat kind, somewhat clear and interested, right? So we're going to do some drills. We're going to do some training drills. The drills aren't the game. So let's separate out something. The game is what we play in life. The game that we play, trying to stay calm, centered, not caught up in reactivity, interested in my life, interested in others, trying to be kind, and playing that in life, that's the game. The training is not the game, but we've got to do the training, right? If we do the training enough, like kicking drills, marking drills, whatever drills you do in footy, you'll get good at playing the game, right? So we mustn't confuse the drills from the game. The drills are for the purposes of the game, and the game's played for real. The game's played for real out there. So what I'm doing, what we can do here now, is about not what happens here, it's about what happens in your life. What happens in those engagements that are difficult. Not what happens here. Right? So if you can wear with that as an idea, I know it might be slightly different, but if you can wear with that with me and bear with me with that, we can do a set of drills. They'll be familiar, but I just want to couch them in different terms. An aspiration, because it just reminds me what I'm doing and what I want for my life. I want to be kind, I want to be clear, I want to be somewhat centered and not lose it. And can that be present in my life? Because if I don't have that really clear, I might just simply do the drills. In a funny sort of way, it carries much more weight if once I'm clear what it is I want, what I'm trying to train, and for what purpose. So as I'm saying that, I'm actually thinking about my life. I'm thinking about these engagements. I'm trying to go to myself, what is it I need, and can I actually start manifesting that in my life? So calm, clear, kindly connected. Then we're just going to do a little bit of exercise. So it's going to be about 25 minutes. So there's a meditation that's going to run for 25 minutes, and I'll just guide you through. I said, I'm not Ajahn Brahm, so it doesn't do that silky smooth. You'll have to just bear with me. It's going to be a bit more rough. So the arms go out to the side. The wrist and the elbows cock back, and you create a bit of tension through the arms. You take a big breath in, you hold it, and then you push up, and then let go. So you do the same again. You do wrist, elbows, big breath in, pushing up. One more time. And then pushing up. And now you're letting go. So it's a cycle of work and rest, and this one's a rest and a letting go. So you can let go any tension that's in your hands, the arms, the shoulders, and the rest of the body. And now it's a big clap. Now rub of your hand. So now you're just rubbing. So this is a work cycle. And you're trying to relax into the work. It's a funny idea. Then stopping, placing the hands over the eyes. And you're just letting the eyes and the gaze soften. So a lot of time on the screen, your eyes tend to strain. So if you could just let the eyes and the gaze soften. Feels like the eyeballs can just rest in their sockets. And then letting that go. So next, you just make circles with your pelvis. And it's a rotation from the pelvis that then involves the whole body. So when you're rolling back, the back rounds. And when you're coming forward, the back arches. And you're bringing awareness to the body in movement. And with the change of intent, can you allow the movement to be pleasurable? So that's all we're doing, just changing the intent, doing the same action, but now allow the movement to be pleasurable. And then circling the opposite direction. Now stopping, so this is the support posture, especially those on the ground. You rotate your pelvis all the way forward so you're hinging at your hips. If you're sitting if you're actually on your chair, you're more around 45 degrees. On the ground, your buttocks and pelvis and muscles around the buttocks actually will stop you from going further. And then you're letting your belly be full and sensing the breath at the belly. And the breath deep into the pelvic bowl. Now maintaining this incline, you're just lifting the head and chest up a little, sensing the breath at the chest. Before just tucking in the chin a little, lengthening the back of the neck, and just gradually rocking yourself back up to the upright posture. So the eyes can be closed or half open, the gaze then falling 2 to 3 meters ahead of you on the floor. The hands can either be in your lap or on your thighs. And here's the first drill. You're just resting your attention lightly on the breath. And it's not the whole of your attention. It's maybe only a quarter of your attention. And all you're doing is stopping from the business to be simply present in this room. And if your mind wanders, which it will, you just simply bring it back to the breath. Just stopping to be simply present. So here's the next drill. Just allowing yourself to settle into your body. So much of the time we spend in our heads. So can you bring awareness into your body? Recognizing you have a body. And you can support that with a body scan. Placing awareness at the soles of your feet. And your toes. The tops of the feet. And around the ankles. The calves and the shins. The knees. Thighs. Hips and buttocks. And then sensing your sit bones and how the lower half of your body contacts the ground. The solidity and support of the ground beneath you. And with gravity working through your body, that sense of groundedness. And just resting your attention for a while in that quality of groundedness and support. And moving up the body, you can sense the breath at the belly. The breath at the chest. The cylinder or vase of the torso breathing, so a sense of the torso in 3 dimensions. The volume breathing. An awareness of shoulders, upper arms, elbows, forearms, the wrist, the back of the hands, the palms and thumbs, index fingers, middle fingers, ring fingers, and little fingers. So you can sense your arms as a whole from the fingertips through to the shoulders connected into the torso. And a sense of being open and balanced. And moving your awareness to your back and your spine, and from your tailbone and then sacrum, like one vertebra stacked on top of another. A lengthened spine as if being gently pulled through the crown of your head. That expresses a poise, and a gentle determination. Then there's your head and your face, the scalp, the back of the head, the forehead, the eyebrows, the eyes, nose, cheeks, upper lip and lower lip. The tongue and the teeth, the breath at the back of the throat, the jaw, ears, front of the neck and the back of the neck connecting into the torso. You can rest your awareness for a while around your chest and sternum, letting it soften, connecting to a heartfelt quality. And having just a hint of a smile at the corners of the eyes, the corners of the lips, more of an inner smile that reminds you of a kindly awareness and the capacity for joy. Now you can sense your body as a whole, from the crown of the head down to the soles of the feet as one. And allowing your posture to speak of a steadfast, awake, kindly and connected presence. And you can be awake and attuned to the sounds around you. To the sensations on your skin. To the light entering your eyes. Let it be an open and spacious awareness. That can contain the reactivity of feelings. Give you some distance to your thoughts. And all the while you're just breathing in and breathing out. Being present to each new moment of your life. And if your mind wanders, which it will, you can just gently bring it back to the breath and the body. It's a kindly awareness. Senses are awake. Centered and spacious. And attention just lightly tethered to the breath. Mind wanders, just gently bring it back to the breath. in the body. Just slowly, in your own way, you can bring the meditation to a close. Are there any questions or comments? Everyone obviously understands everything. It's so simple, right? Okay. Well, it must have been so easy, obviously, right? Okay. Yes.
One of your previous lists of containing caring, yeah, I would include in that listening.
Listening?
Is that?
Pardon?
Listening.
Yeah, it's that sort of clarity and wakefulness.
Yes, but listen like to the other as well.
Pardon?
To that other person who's making you angry.
It has to be to everything.
Yes, I know. Yeah. But it's something that often goes out the window in those situations. The listening, yeah.
The listening, yeah, I know. It's trying to find a way of centering yourself and being open.
Yes.
And then the capacity to keep that heartfelt quality going, the kindness going, and training yourself to do this. And the training is happening basically here.
Yeah.
But all the time when I'm training here, I'm thinking, I'm clear it's about what's out there that's important and not what's here. So it has to be that this practice has a view to what's happening in my life and not as a thing in and of itself. I don't think it goes anywhere if I have it here. If I do this thing here and I'm completely mindless for the rest of my day, it's going to go nowhere, right? And that's just more like coming here to undo all the errors of my ways from the day and then starting all over again the next day and doing the same thing again. Any other comments or questions?
I had another one.
Yes, and you're going to get a little bit closer.
The moral, what was the word?
Moral injury.
The moral injury, I've never heard that before. I think that's a very good way of describing it. But why I find, and I'd be interested to know what you think of sort of being, how you deal with just not so much like that people's strong views or denialism, but just what's the word? The not caring, just indifference. I find indifference is the hardest. thing.
I mean, isn't it tough? I mean, doesn't it get you so angry? You know,
Well, I do. I get really angry about it.
You know, you care for something so much, and then there's these people that basically don't care, and part of you just starts fuming, doesn't it? And you go, it's so bleeding obvious. What are you doing this for, right?
Well, I just get depressed.
You then get depressed, right? So, you know, Spinoza said something like, the philosopher said something, the only way you can counter a strong negative emotion is with a more powerful positive one.
Yeah.
So the question is going to be, what's your strong, positive, wholesome one, and how strong and big does it need to be, and how much do you have to cultivate it? How big can love be? How large can your heart be? How much can you stretch it? Right? And each and every time you meet one of those people you don't like, it's like exercise, isn't it? Can I fit them in to my life and work at it a little bit, you know? And sometimes it breaks you and you just leave spitting chips, don't you? And then you come back and go, can I try that again and do it a bit better? Right? So this is context also for me is everything. All right, there's something I want to just reframe and contextualize something, because to have a bigger view, to be able to contain something that's bigger, to have a bigger heart, you need a bigger view. Right? It can't be done within the constraints of this life. So what would a bigger view be? But to my mind, that's the biggest question. What would a bigger view be? So I have a particular image that haunts me. It doesn't quite haunt it. This picture affects me a lot. Right? It affects me a lot because it's very big. It's very big. But it's unusual, you know. If you go 100 kilometres up, at some point in time, around that place, it's not exactly a clear line, but actually you leave Earth's atmosphere and there's nothing. And if you were to travel 3.6 billion miles, which Voyager 1 did in about 1992, 93, you can see a picture of it. I was going to show you the picture, but it doesn't show up because there's this little dot that you're not going to see, and it's smaller than a pinhead, right? But there it is, there's Earth. And guess what? In that time of travelling, there was nothing else alive. Right? So the only place where life exists, as far as we know for now, is on this one planet. This sphere that's about 40,000 kilometres in circumference, that has about 12,000 kilometres in diameter, where 7.8 billion of us live, and we shared with a whole heap of other animals. In fact, we would probably constitute less than 1% of all of life if we massed it all up, right? We're completely dependent on that life. It provides us the water, it provides us the food, it provides us all sorts of things, right? It is the one place, and we better get on with each other in some sort of way, because it's the only place that we do have. Now, that's a bigger view. And if I hold that bigger view, I can have a slightly bigger heart, because I have to get along with that other person. He's one of the 7.8 billion, and we all share this one planet. And we have to find some way of getting on, because we're dependent on each other. Right? So that framing, that reframing for me is really important. That perspective is really important. It doesn't remove the perspective of also the mundane life of kids and family, trying to find a job, getting irritated by what my kids are doing, being concerned about, you know, what's going on next door or something like that. There's one aspect that's part of my life, and I have to get on with that and do the best as I can with as much kindness as I can. But there's also this other picture, this bigger picture, of which I'm just so extraordinarily grateful for living a miracle. Because that's what it is. This life is a miracle. It's an extraordinary miracle. Out of all the animals that exist, you have a chance of being aware. Not many other animals are aware, and not many other animals can exercise a choice based on that awareness. So human life is extraordinarily precious. And we've existed for a very brief moment of time. You know, in the time of life, if it was to be a calendar year, human life begins at about 4 minutes to midnight on the 31st of December. Right. It's been a lot of lead time before we come into being. It'd be nice to hang around a little longer, right? But this is precious, incredibly precious. So these thoughts, this bigger picture, I think are really important ideas to keep in mind, because it's easy to get lost in the mundaneness of life. And I'm not saying the mundane is not important, but the bigger view is also important. You know, there's teachings around ego and clinging. It's a great way to let go of ego clinging. It's a great perspective to see yourself as being not quite so important. Are there any comments or questions around that last little bit? So in the setting up of my ritual, in the setting of my daily ritual in terms of my practice, you know, my part of the practice involves a reflection around those ideas, a stating of an aspiration of what it is that I'm trying to endeavour to do, the actual drills and the practice, right? And then a sort of an offering up later on and a dedication that I hope it's some meaning, carries some weight and meaning in my life, and that can be shared to others, right? So that's the context of a whole practice, right? And I have to give it importance, because it's what's going to sustain me, it's what's going to orientate me to what I want to unfold in my life. These ideas and this thinking and this heartfelt quality is what I want to unfold, right? So by giving it importance, and it means I'm keen on sitting. I want to sit, because that is the work of my life. There was a question somewhere? Yep. Yeah. So there's two things going on, isn't it? There's this one perspective where I'm saying it's an incredible gift that we have, right? It's an incredible richness to our life and incredible gratitude that we actually even exist, right? And then there's this other thing that's going, it's just horrible what's actually going on, and both can coexist for me. It's not one or the other, right? Both can actually coexist. And this thing has to be bigger than that. And with this thing, I try to understand that all the shapings that meant that the famine has arisen or injustice have arisen has been through a weird sort of blindness of humanity, trying to find a way in life, sort of blindly, not even knowing what it's doing. And it's been, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years of both evolution and attempts at trying to work and live together, but not even knowing what we're doing, that has got us to this place. And it's not ideal and it's not perfect. And it just is. You know, you can't even blame anyone. It's just the whole blindness of who we are as human beings that has got us to the place. And it is distressing. But it's pointless blaming, because there's no one to blame. It's just been blind becoming, as the Buddhists would say, a blind becoming of both individuals and the collective, stumbling along, trying to make sense of the world, you know, and not even knowing, without any awareness of what's actually going on. And bit by bit, I think we're waking up. Bit by bit, everyone's looking, going, this is crazy what we're doing. This is crazy that this, and it's happening very quickly, right at this point in time. It's happening very, very quickly. So we're waking up to this idea that of the pressures of our life, that we all are dependent on each other, that this notion of injustice doesn't help anyone. You know, we have to find a way of working together and living together, but it can't stop a momentum from the past, right? You can't suddenly arrest it and go, no, it's this becoming that's still carrying on. You know, what you would describe as more like the collective karma in Buddhist terms of a whole arising of both individuals and society in a certain sort of way. So our job here now is trying to wake ourselves up, wake society up in some sort of way, sort of a grand awakening to who and what we are, our interdependence, our capacity for love, kindness and understanding. Right? It's a funny job, but we do the best we can in that context. Right? It's a mission. There are different schools of Buddhism, right? And one of the schools of Buddhism upholds an idea of waking up for the sake of others, trying to bring to the world some sense of an awakened mind and seeing that as being the job to be done. Like that. And I find that a useful practice, you know, a useful thing to try to work with. It's both challenging, but in the challenge, in a sense, grow. In a sense of meeting with the difficulty, it's like the grit that's in an oyster. From that grit, something grows. You've got to be challenged before you develop yourself or push yourself a little further to try to understand more. Are there any other comments or questions? Yeah.
You know, just on your meditation, I find it interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to add in what he did was you took us. Oh, sorry. Richard, yeah, your meditation is very interesting. Yeah. I'm going to adopt from what I do. Okay, adopt your style whereby you took us around. You know, like a awareness of our body parts, or feeling whole thing. You know.
And then the whole thing.
Yes, yeah. You know what I do, Richard, you know, is in the Buddhist Vipassana Samatha, coming in, yeah. So whenever talking about problem, okay, whenever there's a problem, this thing, I would sort of calm myself down,
yes.
Okay, yeah, and calm myself down, this thing, and then the thing is, I will look into my thoughts, you know, I bring in the 5 aggregates, yes. You know, the mind and matter, and then I come back, then I look at the mind over the thoughts affecting our feelings now. If the thought is good thought, this thing, you feel good, isn't it? If it's you have a problem, you know, disturbing us, then there's this bad feelings or what call this thing is disturbing emotions. Yeah. So what I do this thing is I would sort of look into the situation, like, oh, this thing happens, okay, that makes me, you know, not happy. And then my mind, you know, this thing happens, and my feelings, you know, and how my mind keeps like how do I say, engaging with the thing, you know, you're holding on, you know. Yeah. So the thing is, it comes perception, you know, the consciousness, the feelings, the perceptions, how we form ideas, you know. Yeah. So what I do is I would calm myself down. I look instead of getting the situation take me, you know, like you get lost, isn't it? So I'm in control of the situation. You see what I mean? Yeah. And then from there on, this thing, and then you bring in the Buddha's teaching, impermanence, have a bit of patience, all these things.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Yeah. That's to solve my problem. That's under my control. Not like before, you don't know. Oh, you get lost. Now you go and see the doctor, psychiatrist, or all this. You know, and they give you all this medication. So you know how to do it. You think, and then I learned from Buddhism. There is the process, you know, whereby however difficult the situation is, it becomes less and less impermanent.
Yeah. So.
I always remember the story. This one more. Okay, There's this story. There's this young guy, you know. he was going to kill himself, life is not worth living and all these things because his girlfriend left him in it, okay? 5 or 6 months later, he was on top of his wall, he was laughing, he had a new girlfriend.
Yeah.
So that there is this in us, what it's impermanent. No matter how difficult, it becomes less and less.
Yeah. So partly it's so it's this style of practice is a little bit funny because it's not actually truly samatha or vipassana. It's got a weird mix of both samatha and vipassana, right? So it's got traditionally you would say it's neither. So it's got a particular perspective, and it's a perspective that doesn't go down that same analytical pathway as a vipassana practice, right? So, but partly there's a pragmatism to what is being offered here. A pragmatism around living a life where you're less caught up in reactivity and more than having some distance to your thoughts and some distance to feelings and being able to contain those feelings so you don't simply have to react, that you can decide how to respond, and responding based on values. So the cultivation of values and embodying those values. So those values are both thought through contemplations, but they're also values that you weave into your physical presence in the context of your posture, that your posture speaks those values, that your posture speaks kindness, that your posture speaks the steadfast presence, right? So it's woven into that. So that values discourse is woven both within the context of contemplations prior, but also woven into the actual posture itself. But it has less of this analytical aspect that you're describing. I'm not saying that out of doing it you don't come to those same insights. It's just not articulated in this sort of way, right? And it offers a different approach, and it's complicated, but I'm trying to find a way of describing a practice that is accessible, easily accessible, so that notion that one can live a life caught up less in reactivity, that can speak to being kind, that can be steadfastly present, that can then choose a responsiveness, and that would be a meaningful life. I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy with that without needing to do the full Buddha Dharma. I'm not saying that those insights don't then arise, but I'd be happy with just living that.
So can I say something? Yeah. Also, Richard, there's no one way, no different people. We all have different,
Yeah.
The Buddha's approach,
Yeah.
when he approaches people, he is flexible. He changes depending on the people's temperament, all these things.
Yeah. Are there any other comments or questions? Yeah.
So there have been so many activists who great, so famous.
Yes.
The world has not changed at all. So is there any point in being an activist?
So the question was, there's been so many great activists and the world has not changed at all, and is there any point in being an activist? The funny thing, some part of me doesn't, some part of me isn't an activist because I think anything's going to change. I know that sounds a bit weird. Some part of me is not being an activist because I think anything is going to change. Some part of me is simply an activist because I think somehow that's the right thing to do. Some part of me does it because it's aligned to some moral sense of what's right, irrespective of the outcome. So in some sort of way, I don't really care, in one way, about the outcome at one level, because whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But it's important that I act in accord with something, some truth. So it's easy. You just do that. Doesn't matter about the outcome then. Just do that. If something good happens, it's great. I'm not sure that Gandhi went around absolutely certain that whatever he did was going to end up in anything. He just did it, I think, because that was what was right. And I think that'd be the same for most of the famous activists. If you look at some of the adversities that they were facing, it'd almost be madness to believe you're going to succeed. Really. You'd just be going, well, I'm not saying there's not a chance, but I'd just be going, I think they just did it because that's what they needed to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got another question.
Yeah.
Like, in this universe, there are so many stars. Basically, they are sun, right? So, isn't there any possibility of life on those planets?
I would love to meet another life, and I'm sure that there would be, but as yet we haven't found it, so I'm not holding my breath in the meantime like that. I just maybe thought, I said I was going to touch on joy, so I got a few minutes and I thought I'd briefly do joy. Okay. One question there.
Hi, Richard. You probably just answered this question anyway, but when we're not burnt out and we're confronted, I guess, with people who are what we perceive to be climate change deniers or people who are indifferent, if we approach them with compassion, I guess sometimes we can try and put away those assumptions that it's about greed, and I guess sometimes think that maybe people are acting out of just fear, and maybe they have stepped back and are looking at the earth and saying, well, I can't do anything about it, so it's best to just shut that down, and I've got to try and survive because this is inevitable, or maybe they have grasped the concept of impermanence as well.
Yeah.
Do you have any, I guess, thoughts or suggestions on how we can then have conversations with people?
I'm not sure that you can have conversations actually with everyone about this topic, and I think it's pointless sometimes to have conversations with certain groups of people. There's not going to be that meeting place, so you've got to find those meeting places where there might be something productive from the engagement. And there's just some places where there isn't. Or you're not the one anyway to have it. Someone else might be the one, but you're not the one to have it. And I think it's just the way the world is, and you're hoping out of all the, I don't know, if you multiplied 7.8 billion in all the possible interactions that would happen, going, well, somewhere within all of that mix of interactions, somehow something starts moving in the right direction, and you just hope that your little contribution makes some little difference to that whole network, influences that network in some way. I thought I'd do joy because, the thing I really like about joy, it makes you feel good. The other thing about joy is, you could do the sort of work where you actually make yourself, and it's a bit masochistic, and you sort of like drive yourself. But when you're really happy and joyous, there's an energy, and with energy and enthusiasm, you can actually use that and run off that. So it tops you up. So knowing how to foster joy, I wouldn't say cultivate it. Knowing how to foster joy, I think, is really important. So I'm going to give you an exercise that will support you in fostering joy or cultivating joy or remembering joy in some way. It's really easy, okay? It's quite fun to do. You could just don't make it too serious. It doesn't work. You can't get serious about joy. That doesn't cut it. If you can remember to smile a little bit, it helps. If you can have some sense of this heartfelt quality, it helps in your heart. And it's really simple. All you have to do is you just start, and in your mind, you're trying to bring to mind someone, either now or in the past or in your past, that sparks joy in you. And you all have a someone. And it need not be you as an adult, it could be you as a kid. But somehow on meeting them, seeing them, it sparks a joy in you. And you might be so lucky to have even more than one, so you could think of others. Someone that lights up your face, lightens your heart, brings that little twinkle to your eye. And just feeling that emotion and that mind state. Then letting it go. And now thinking of an animal, maybe a pet, maybe an animal in nature. Maybe it's the sound of the bird. But on seeing that animal, or hearing that animal, it sparks a joy in you. And then letting that go. Reflecting on a place. Maybe it's the family home, the holiday place, your own home, somewhere in nature, the beach. Let on seeing it or being there lightens your heart, brings a smile to your face. Sparks a joy in you. And then you can allow your mind to scroll through some of those memories. Just touching them for a while, noticing the emotion, the feeling. Then dissolving all imagination. Resting for a while in the afterglow. With some sense of gratitude for having known those people, those animals, those places. And if you were to do this exercise from time to time in the week, I promise you, you would get to notice more joy in your life, more things that you are grateful for. And as you notice them more, you will have more joy in your life. And it will be this virtuous cycle that's joyous and give you energy and enthusiasm for the life. We'll just close with a dedication. May any good that has arisen through this practice and us coming together may it be present in my life and shared with others. May any good that has arisen with us by us coming together may it be present in my life and shared with others. May any good that has arisen with us coming together may it be present in my life and shared with others. May all that live be well and happy. May all that lives be well and happy. May all that lives be well and happy. But thank you for having me. I hope it was worthwhile. Cheers.
Wonderful. It was really cool. Okay. No, it was really,
Yeah, it was really, this time was the first time I actually got some sense of engagement. The other times were a bit harder, but this one I actually was surprised.
Richard, on behalf of the committee, little thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, thank you for that.